Hi, Dr. Zafiris and organizational communication classmates. This is Tiffany, and I will be presenting Chapter 1 of Susan Cain's book, Quiet, to you today. First, I want to delve into a short story that was highlighted in the preface of the text. This story tells about one of Susan's first clients. Her name was Laura. Laura was a Harvard law grad who's been practicing for a firm for the last 3 years. At this 3-year point, her boss takes a vacation and leaves her in charge while he is off. In the time period that her boss is off, there's a huge contract negotiation with a banking client, at which point Laura is in charge and Laura freezes up. At the point in which she freezes up, she remembers that her introversion is something that she can't let work against her if she's going to move forward in this situation. So she starts to think about how that can benefit her, and she knows that she can ask questions very well and that she has the research to formulate additional questions and to hopefully solve this contract negotiation successfully. So case in point, Laura does end up closing the deal in this contract negotiation. She only has one executive storm out of the office angry at her, during which time she stays calm, cool, and collected as an introvert would do. The following day, she's not only satisfied with the fact that she closed the deal, but she receives a call from their client's lawyer offering her a job because she did such a good job, and she was quoted as being the most kind and efficient a lawyer that she had met. Then on top of that, her client also wanted to use her firm for future legal proceedings because of how well she had done in the situation. So this story initially may not seem like that big of a deal, but Susan Cain ends the preface by stating that this Laura, who's introverted, is actually a fictitious client that she made up, and that Laura was actually herself. So I think that it opens Susan Cain up in the preface of the textbook, allowing us to get to know her a little bit better, and just hinting on how this book is going to harness and prove that inner power of introversion versus the extroversion ideal, which is what we're going to move forward talking about. So on the screen we have 9 points that are widely discussed during Chapter 1. So starting with Dale Carnegie, if you guys do not immediately recognize his name, I can guarantee you will understand or know who he is in about 2 or 3 minutes here. So Dale grew up on a pig farm, and he was very introverted, very self-conscious, shy. He often had thoughts about freezing up at his own wedding, not knowing what he would say to his future wife. He went to college, and he constantly found himself admiring those that could speak publicly and those that were highly social. So Dale aimed to change and started publicly speaking. At first he did so extremely horribly, but eventually he was doing so well enough that others were asking him for advice. So Dale graduated college and became a salesman for a few years. That did not last very long, as he at this point really felt that his passion and his knowledge base was in public speaking and presenting. So he started instructing classes in the evenings, which were highly publicized and highly attended. So Dale sort of became this figure for speaking and leading. He published many books, the most famous being How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's still published today. It's constantly updated and edited, and some of you watching this might have even read a bit of it, or possibly the whole thing. So Dale's story resonates a lot with the industrialized America, which is the next concept that Chapter 1 moves directly into. In the late 19th century, modern plumbing and electrical systems were being found in many middle-class homes. We move right into the 20th century, and there's a high manufacturing and high retail market. We see a big presence of Ford Motor Car, and then for retail corporations, J.C. Penney and the Sears Roebuck catalog is just huge at that time. So this is where the modern day salesman sort of starts to come into play as well, because of how everything is shaping and forming in America. This moves right into that extroverted ideal that then is needed. In Susan Cain's book, she phrases it correctly, that this new society called for a new kind of man, a social operator with a mastered handshake. Alas, the salesman was born. So Dale Carnegie, growing up right into at the end of the 19th into the 20th century, everything that he was going through really perfected him to be a leader at this time period, and sort of put a spin on personalities, which is our next concept, and how important it was to be loud and to be social for success. So personality matters. That's what we see on the little picture that is brought in, and that is most certainly the case. There was a lot of importance that shifted from an inner virtue to an outer charm. Character became almighty, and we also saw a rise in America in obsession with movie stars, and there were pressure from advertisements as well to be a certain way or to look a certain way. So before, there really wasn't that. There's different classes of people, and that was just what it was. But as America industrialized, we also saw America urbanize. We saw movement into the cities, and it really started to be more of a class act person that you could frame yourself into being to guarantee success. So this term fascination that comes directly after personality was brought up, and I really wanted to highlight it from the chapter because it discusses women directly. And it was a specific quality that women were taught to work on. It was to show visible charisma and the ability to project confidence. So women didn't need to just sit and look pretty anymore. To a point, they did. It was still based on social class, how prominent you could be in a social situation, so there was a line to this. It also was noted that for a male prospect, there was good breeding considerations, and they did still want you to have a small amount of reserve, but they also wanted you to be confident and to be flirtatious in this coming period. So this was late 20s, like early 1930s, that we're seeing this really come into play for women. So the two concepts following are the inferiority complex, children, youth, and parents. And this should be no surprise, really, as we see like individuals like Dale Carnegie growing up in the beginning of the 20th century. We move more into the middle part of the 20th century, and now all of these parents that grew up with this extrovert ideal are now, selling it as the only way to success for their children. So the inferiority complex was actually something that was identified by Viennese psychologist Alfred Adler in the late 1920s, and he actually coined this term as we're all born with superiorities, but as we grow and as we live life, we start to become nervous, apprehensive, shy, self-doubting, basically all of these things and personality traits that we didn't want to hold, or that our parents wouldn't want us to hold to become successful. So it was a common reference that, I think my child has an IC, or women even being concerned about marrying someone because they have an IC. But the positive thing about the IC and how it was kind of framed to everyone was that it wasn't a chronic illness, so it was preventable if it hadn't yet occurred, and if somebody was already experiencing it, it could be cured. You could teach someone how to be confident and how to be superior again. So children, youth, and parents comes into play directly with this complex. We see a big shift to development of winning personalities for every child. There was a huge issue with quiet, with self-development. Pretty much anything that was social was prominent and was encouraged. That was viewed as healthy. At this time, we're talking still 1950s here, maybe even late 1940s, definitely into the 60s and 70s as well. So parents from this time period will say, and it's well proven, that they did actually need to enforce these things on their children at the time, because the real world that they were going to be entering into, so universities and the job markets, was no better. They were looking for that extrovert candidate and directly shunning people that were just more intellectual, or even people that had higher GPAs. They wanted more of the loud person with an 85 GPA than the quiet person with a 95. And she references that right in chapter 1 as being fact. So with all of this pressure to be louder and more verse and friendly, it should come as no surprise really that this is where we see anxiety also show up as not a trait really, but something that's occurring, and that's a problem, because it's a feeling that you can't necessarily own up to this world around you that's ever changing and demanding you to be something that for a lot of people they weren't on their own, and they weren't given the right tools to develop into extroversion correctly. They were just forced to be extroverted all the time. So I did want to mention some things that the book throws out about the anxiety medicine. So the anti-anxiety drug Miltown was released in 1955, and it quickly becomes the fastest selling pharmaceutical in U.S. history. By 1956, 1 in every 20 Americans had tried it, and by 1960, 1/3 of all prescriptions were for Miltown or a similar drug called Equinel. There was also a third tranquilizer drug that was emphasized directly in their slogan for anxiety that comes from not fitting in. So the drug companies knew that this was a response to the social ideal, and it didn't matter. So it was fine to be anxious. You just needed to take this pill to calm down, and everything would be okay. So Susan closes out chapter 1 by introducing us to the group Toastmasters. I did some research myself. They originated in 1924. They do exist as a leadership organization still today. There's 3 units in Erie, Pennsylvania. There is 1 unit in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Her main point to introducing this organization, to wrap up the chapter, is to highlight an example of an individual at one of these meetings is talking about her opera career. And in this story, she's explaining how she gave up that elusive opera career for her family. After giving her speech, the Toastmaster audience has to vote on whether they believe the story was true or not. In this instance, the story was false, but the audience regarded it as true. Cain's point from this is being that getting ahead in today's world means construing whatever is needed, even if it's a lie. To Cain, a marker of how far we've come, but not in a good way. She asks, how did we go from character to personality without realizing that we had sacrificed something meaningful along the way? And a quick move forward just in a little bit of class connections and personal application. I would say that it would come as no surprise that our current culture still enforces the notion that extroverts are better communicators, presenters, public speakers, and leaders. We just view them as being more open, more comfortable with interaction, and their outgoing personalities just make them more desirable to work with. We will see, though, that introverts should not be disregarded, and Susan Cain will illustrate for us that introverts too can, and research shows do, make just as effective leaders as extroverts, if not better. So to wrap up, I just wanted to end on this infographic. You guys can look it over and see where you fall. And I just wanted to remind everyone that if you're answering yes to questions on both sides of the spectrum like I do, there is another category, and that is the category of an ambivert. And we will learn more about ambiversion moving forward in Quiet as well. So that is my presentation for you guys and my reference list. I hope that it was informative and you enjoyed it, and I look forward to listening to your presentations as well. Thanks.